My daughter's boyfriend made her do 500 push-ups for eating pizza. When she collapsed, he said, "Weakness deserves pain." I recorded everything. My 16-year-old daughter Emma came home with blood on her knuckles yesterday. When I asked what happened, she said she deserved it for disappointing Tyler. That's when I knew I had to act. It started 6 months ago when Emma began dating Tyler Brennan, the captain of the track team. At first, I was happy for her. She'd struggled with confidence after her mom's death 2 years earlier, and Tyler seemed to make her smile again. Emma had always been beautiful, but she'd gained some weight after losing her mother. Grief made her seek comfort in food, and I'd been focused on just keeping her afloat emotionally. When Tyler started paying attention to her, I thought it would help her self-esteem. I was wrong. The changes started small. Emma stopped eating dessert at dinner, claiming she wasn't hungry. She began running every morning before school, something she'd never done before. When I asked about it, she said Tyler was helping her get healthier. "He really cares about me, Dad," she'd say, beaming. "He wants me to be the best version of myself." Within a month, Emma had lost 15 pounds. She looked great, and I told her so. But something in her eyes had changed. The joy was being replaced by constant anxiety about what she ate, how she looked, whether she'd measured up to Tyler's standards. Tyler started coming over for dinner regularly. He was charming, polite to me, helpful around the house. He'd bring flowers for Emma and compliment my cooking. I liked him. He seemed mature for 17, focused on his goals. But I began noticing small things. How he'd watch Emma eat, making subtle comments about portion sizes. How he'd squeeze her hand too tightly when she reached for seconds. How he'd suggest she might want to skip certain foods. "Just looking out for you, babe," he'd say with a smile. "You're doing so well." Emma would beam at his approval and push her plate away half finished. The exercise escalated gradually. Emma started going to the gym with Tyler after school every day. She'd come home exhausted, sweaty, barely able to climb the stairs. When I expressed concern, she insisted she felt great. "Tyler has this amazing workout plan," she'd tell me. "He's trained with college coaches. He knows what he's doing." One evening, I came home early from work to find Emma in our backyard doing jumping jacks in the rain. She was soaked, shivering, but wouldn't stop when I called to her. "Just 50 more?" she called back. "Tyler says consistency is everything." Tyler wasn't even there. He'd assigned her the workout via text. That's when I started paying closer attention to their interactions. Tyler had a way of framing everything as concern for Emma's well-being. He never directly insulted her, never raised his voice. Instead, he'd make suggestions disguised as care. "You know I love you no matter what," he'd say while pinching her stomach. "But wouldn't you feel more confident if you toned up just a little more?" Emma would nod eagerly, desperate for his approval. The food restrictions became more severe. Emma started weighing everything she ate, tracking calories in a notebook Tyler had given her. She'd panic if she went over her daily limit, which seemed to get lower each week. I tried talking to her about healthy eating, but she'd recite Tyler's rules like gospel. No carbs after 2 p.m., no more than 200 calories per day, no exceptions, even on her birthday. "Tyler studied nutrition," she'd explain. "He knows what works." When Emma fainted during chemistry class, the school nurse called me immediately. Her blood sugar had crashed from not eating enough. I rushed to pick her up, finding her pale and shaky in the nurse's office. Tyler was there too, holding her hand and looking concerned. He told me he'd been worried about Emma pushing herself too hard and offered to drive her home so I wouldn't have to leave work. I almost said yes. He seemed so caring, so responsible. But something made me insist on taking her myself. On the drive home, Emma kept apologizing for being weak, for embarrassing Tyler at school. She was terrified he'd be angry with her for fainting. That night, I heard her on the phone with Tyler, sobbing as she promised to do better. I couldn't make out his responses, but whatever he was saying made her cry harder. The workout punishment started after Emma ate a slice of pizza at a school event without asking Tyler's permission first. She came home that evening and immediately changed into workout clothes. "Tyler designed a special routine to help me get back on track," she explained, heading to our home gym in the basement. I followed her down and watched in horror as she began doing push-ups. Not regular push-ups, but the kind Tyler had taught her. Perfect form, no rest, counting each one aloud. After 50, her arms were shaking. After 100, she was sweating heavily. I told her that was enough, but she insisted she had to finish all 500. "It's what I deserve," she said between gasps. "Tyler says consequences teach discipline." I made her stop at 200 despite her protests. She was angry with me for the rest of the evening, worried about how Tyler would react when she told him she hadn't completed her punishment. The next day, Tyler came over to check on Emma's progress. I overheard him asking why she'd only done 200 push-ups. When she explained that I'd made her stop, his tone shifted. "Your dad doesn't understand what we're trying to accomplish," he said coldly. "He's enabling your weakness." From that point on, Tyler began positioning me as the enemy of Emma's progress. He suggested that my concern was actually sabotage, that I wanted to keep Emma unhealthy because I was used to taking care of her. Emma started working out in secret, either at Tyler's house or late at night when she thought I was asleep. I'd find her sneaking back inside at midnight, covered in sweat, barely able to walk from exhaustion. When I confronted her about these midnight workouts, she broke down crying. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "Tyler is the only person who's ever believed I could be better. He sees my potential. If I don't prove I'm worthy of his help, he'll give up on me." The word worthy hit me like a punch to the gut. My daughter believed she had to earn the right to be loved, I tried talking to Tyler directly, inviting him over for a man-to-man conversation. He was respectful, articulate, and convincing. He explained his training philosophy, showed me articles about teenage athlete nutrition, and expressed genuine concern for Emma's emotional well-being. She was really struggling when we met, he said sincerely. I just want to help her build confidence through achieving goals. Sometimes that requires pushing past comfort zones. He made it sound so reasonable, so caring, but I noticed how Emma tensed whenever Tyler spoke, how she watched his face for any sign of disapproval. She barely said a word during the entire conversation, just nodded along with whatever Tyler suggested. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I came home from work to find Emma collapsed on our living room floor, barely conscious. Tyler was there, standing over her with his arms crossed. She's fine, he said when he saw my panic. Just pushed a little too hard during today's workout. It happens to athletes all the time. Emma was dehydrated, exhausted, and covered in her own vomit. Tyler had made her do 1,000 burpees as punishment for eating a piece of birthday cake at school without permission. While I called 911, I heard Tyler talking to Emma as she drifted in and out of consciousness. This is what happens when you make bad choices, he said calmly. Your body is telling you that weakness deserves pain. You need to listen to those signals. I started recording on my phone without him noticing. The paramedics arrived and immediately began treating Emma for severe dehydration and exhaustion. Her heart rate was dangerously elevated, and her blood pressure had dropped significantly. Tyler told the paramedics that Emma had been training for track season and had probably overdone it. He presented himself as her concerned boyfriend who'd tried to get her to stop exercising, but I had the recording of what he'd actually said. At the hospital, Emma was admitted for overnight observation. The doctors were concerned about her electrolyte levels and wanted to monitor her heart rhythm. She'd lost 35 pounds in 6 months, dropping from a healthy 140 to a dangerous 105 on her 5'6" frame. Tyler stayed by Emma's bedside, playing the devoted boyfriend perfectly. He brought flowers, talked about how scared he'd been, and promised the doctors he'd make sure Emma took better care of herself. I watched Emma's face during his performance. She was terrified of disappointing him, even while lying in a hospital bed because of his demands. That night, I made copies of everything. The workout schedules Tyler had written for Emma, the food diary he'd made her keep, photos of her dramatic weight loss, and most importantly, the recording of his comments while she was collapsed. I also started documenting Emma's daily routine. Her 4 a.m. wake-up calls for morning runs, the way she measured every bite of food, how she'd disappear for hours to complete Tyler's punishment workouts. When we got home from the hospital, Emma immediately wanted to call Tyler to apologize for worrying him. She was convinced the collapse was her fault for not building up enough endurance. I sat her down and played the recording of Tyler's comments while she was unconscious. Her face went white as she heard him say, "Weakness deserves pain. He was just frustrated," she whispered. "He worked so hard to help me and I keep letting him down." The level of psychological manipulation was staggering. Tyler had convinced Emma that his abuse was actually care, that her suffering was self-improvement, that questioning his methods meant she was weak and ungrateful. I contacted a therapist who specialized in abusive relationships and eating disorders. Dr. Sarah Chen agreed to see Emma immediately after I described the situation. "What you're describing is a form of intimate partner violence," Dr. Chen explained during our first meeting. "The victim often doesn't recognize the abuse because it's disguised as care and presented as being for their own good." Emma was resistant to therapy at first, insisting that Tyler was just trying to help her be healthy. She defended his methods and blamed herself for not being strong enough to handle his training program. But Dr. Chen was skilled at helping Emma recognize the manipulation tactics Tyler used, how he'd isolated her from friends who questioned his methods, how he'd made her dependent on his approval for self-worth, how he'd convinced her that normal human limitations were personal failures. Tyler sensed he was losing control over Emma and escalated his tactics. He started showing up at our house unannounced, insisting he needed to check on Emma's recovery. He'd bring new workout plans, claiming he'd modified them to be safer. When I refused to let him see Emma during her therapy appointments, he accused me of keeping her from someone who truly cared about her. "You're sabotaging Emma's progress," he told me during one confrontation. "She was finally building discipline and confidence, and you're teaching her to be a victim instead." His manipulation was sophisticated. He positioned himself as Emma's advocate and me as an overprotective father who couldn't handle his daughter's independence. But I had evidence of what his advocacy actually looked like. I started connecting with other parents in town, sharing my concerns about Tyler's behavior. What I discovered was horrifying. Tyler had a pattern. Every girl he dated went through the same cycle: initial attention and affection, followed by gradual control over their diet and exercise, escalating to punishment workouts and emotional abuse. His ex-girlfriend Madison had been hospitalized for an eating disorder during their relationship. Her parents had blamed her perfectionist personality, never suspecting Tyler's influence. Another ex, Chloe, had developed exercise bulimia, compulsively working out for hours after eating anything Tyler deemed unhealthy. She'd torn her ACL from overtraining, but continued exercising because Tyler said injuries were mental weakness. These girls' parents had seen Tyler the same way I initially had, a motivated young man who cared about their daughter's health and success. None of them had recognized his behavior behavior as abuse until it was too late. Armed with this information, I approached the school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was shocked by what I'd documented and immediately began investigating Tyler's influence on other students. What she found confirmed my worst fears. Tyler was recruiting vulnerable girls, particularly those dealing with grief, family problems, or self-esteem issues. He'd position himself as their savior, promising to help them transform their lives through discipline and hard work. The school administration was initially reluctant to take action. Tyler was a star athlete with college recruitment prospects. His grades were excellent, and he'd never been in trouble academically or disciplinarily. But Dr. Chen provided expert testimony about the psychological abuse tactics Tyler employed, and I shared the recording of his comments during Emma's collapse. The school board held a closed session to review the evidence. Tyler was suspended pending a full investigation into his behavior toward female students. His parents immediately hired a lawyer and threatened to sue the school for discrimination against their son. They claimed Tyler was being persecuted for encouraging healthy lifestyle choices, but the evidence was overwhelming. 7 different girls had experienced similar patterns of control and abuse in relationships with Tyler. The school had no choice but to take action. Tyler was expelled and banned from all school activities. His college recruiting prospects evaporated as news of the investigation spread through athletic networks. Emma's recovery was slow and difficult. She'd been so psychologically conditioned to seek Tyler's approval that breaking those patterns required intensive therapy. She experienced withdrawal-like symptoms when cut off from Tyler's constant feedback. She'd panic about eating normal portions, convinced she was being lazy and undisciplined. Dr. Chen worked with Emma on rebuilding her relationship with food and exercise, teaching her to recognize hunger and fullness cues Tyler had trained her to ignore, helping her understand that rest and recovery were necessary parts of any healthy fitness routine. The hardest part was helping Emma recognize that Tyler's treatment of her had been abuse. She'd been so convinced that he cared about her that accepting the truth meant acknowledging she'd been victimized. "He said he loved me," she cried during one therapy session. "He said he was the only person who believed in me." Abusers often use love as justification for control, Dr. Chen explained gently. Real love doesn't require you to earn it through suffering. Tyler made several attempts to contact Emma after his expulsion. He sent flowers with cards claiming he missed her and wanted to apologize. He had friends deliver messages about how sorry he was and how much he'd learned from his mistakes. Each contact sent Emma into an emotional spiral. Part of her still craved his approval, still believed she'd lost someone who truly cared about her. I blocked his number, returned the flowers, and made it clear to his friends that any further contact would result in legal action. Tyler's parents approached me at a community event, demanding I drop the charges and stop spreading lies about their son. They claimed Tyler was being scapegoated for teenage relationship drama. "Boys that age don't know how to express feelings properly," Tyler's mother said. "You're ruining his future over normal teenage awkwardness." I played her the recording of Tyler telling my unconscious daughter that weakness deserved pain. Her face went pale as she heard her son's voice. For the first time, she seemed to understand that this wasn't normal teenage behavior. Tyler's father was less receptive. He accused me of recording private conversations illegally and threatened legal action if I continued sharing the evidence. But the recording had been made in my own home during a medical emergency. It was completely legal and devastating effective at showing Tyler's true character. The local newspaper picked up the story after the school board meeting became public record. Tyler's pattern of behavior became community knowledge, protecting other potential victims from his manipulation. College recruiters who'd been interested in Tyler withdrew their offers. His social media accounts were flooded with comments from people calling out his abusive behavior. Tyler's response was to position himself as the victim of false accusations. He claimed jealous parents were trying to destroy his athletic career because their own children couldn't compete with his success. He started a GoFundMe claiming he needed money for legal fees to fight the school's discrimination. The fundraiser was shut down after community members shared evidence of his abusive behavior in the comments. Emma slowly began to heal. She gained back some healthy weight and learned to exercise for enjoyment rather than punishment. Her smile returned gradually, no longer dependent on someone else's approval. 6 months after Tyler's expulsion, Emma started dating again. This time she recognized the warning signs of controlling behavior and trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. "I know what real care looks like now," she told me. "It doesn't require me to hurt myself to prove I'm worthy of it." Dr. Chen helped Emma develop healthy relationships with food, exercise, and her own self-worth. She learned that her value as a person wasn't dependent on her appearance or her ability to meet impossible standards. Emma testified at Tyler's juvenile court hearing for assault and psychological abuse. Her testimony was powerful and articulate, describing how Tyler's systematic manipulation had nearly destroyed her physical and mental health. Tyler was convicted and sentenced to community service, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order preventing contact with Emma or any of his other victims. His college prospects were permanently damaged. No reputable program wanted to recruit an athlete with a record of abusing female students. Tyler's parents finally acknowledged their son's behavior after hearing Emma's testimony. They apologized publicly and committed to getting Tyler intensive therapy before he could hurt anyone else. The other girls Tyler had victimized found strength in Emma's courage. Madison, Chloe, and 5 other victims came forward with their own testimonies about Tyler's abusive patterns. A support group formed for Tyler's victims, led by Dr. Chen. The girls helped each other recognize manipulation tactics and rebuild healthy relationships with themselves. Emma became an advocate for recognizing relationship abuse among teenagers. She spoke at school assemblies about the difference between supportive encouragement and psychological manipulation. Abuse doesn't always look like hitting, she'd tell other students. Sometimes it looks like someone who claims to care about you while systematically destroying your self-worth. Tyler moved to another state with his family after graduating from an alternative school program. I occasionally check his social media to make sure he's not targeting new victims. He seems to have learned to be more careful about his image, but I doubt he's fundamentally changed. Abusers rarely reform without intensive intervention and genuine accountability. Emma is thriving now. She's a senior in high school, planning to study psychology in college. She wants to help other teenagers recognize and escape abusive relationships. She runs track for fun now, setting her own goals and celebrating her achievements without needing anyone else's approval. She eats intuitively, trusting her body's signals rather than following arbitrary rules. Most importantly, she understands her own worth. She knows she deserves love and respect without having to earn them through suffering. The recording I made of Tyler's comments during Emma's collapse became evidence in his conviction. It also served as a wake-up call for our community about the sophisticated nature of teenage relationship abuse. Schools now train staff to recognize signs of controlling behavior between students. Parents are educated about manipulation tactics that go beyond physical violence. Emma's story helped create policies protecting other vulnerable teenagers from predators who disguise abuse as care. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts about Tyler despite his convincing facade. The evidence I gathered saved Emma's life and protected other potential victims from his manipulation. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who convince everyone, including their victims, that their cruelty is actually kindness. But truth has power. Evidence speaks louder than manipulation, and love that requires suffering isn't love at all. Emma learned that the hard way, but she learned it, and now she's using that knowledge to protect others from the same predator who nearly destroyed her. But this story doesn't end with Tyler's conviction. It takes a much darker turn that I never saw coming. 2 years later, Emma was a freshman in college, studying psychology and thriving in her new environment. She'd found a healthy relationship with a kind, supportive boyfriend named David, who encouraged her goals without trying to control her. I thought we'd put Tyler behind us for good. Then I got a call from Detective Martinez at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. "Mr. Richardson, we need you to come to the station immediately. It's about Tyler Brennan." My blood ran cold. "What about him? Has he contacted Emma?" "Sir, Tyler was found dead in his apartment 3 hours ago. We need to ask you and Emma some questions." I woke Emma immediately and drove to the police station in a daze. Tyler was dead at 19. Despite everything he'd done to Emma, the news hit harder than I expected. Detective Martinez explained that Tyler had apparently died by suicide, leaving behind a note that mentioned Emma specifically. The note blamed her testimony for ruining his life and claimed he couldn't live with the shame she'd brought on him. "We need to know if he'd made any recent contact," Detective Martinez said gently. "Any threats or concerning communications?" Emma was shaking as she assured them Tyler hadn't contacted her since his conviction. She'd been careful about her social media privacy and had moved on completely. But then Detective Martinez showed us Tyler's note. "Emma Richardson destroyed my future with her lies," it read. "She convinced everyone I was a monster when I was just trying to help her be better. I hope she's happy knowing she killed someone who loved her." Even in death, Tyler was trying to manipulate the narrative, making Emma responsible for his choices, painting himself as the victim one final time. "This is not your fault," I told Emma as she cried. "He's still trying to control you even now." But the damage was immediate. Tyler's suicide note went viral on social media after someone leaked it to a local news station. The story shifted from his conviction for abuse to Emma's alleged role in driving him to suicide. Comments poured in blaming Emma for Tyler's death. Strangers who knew nothing about the case accused her of ruining an innocent boy's life with false allegations. "She should be charged with murder," one comment read. "That poor boy killed himself because of her lies." Emma's college friends began treating her differently after the news broke. Some believed the media narrative that she'd falsely accused Tyler. Others were afraid to associate with someone involved in such a controversial case. Emma's grades plummeted as she struggled with guilt and public blame. She started isolating herself, skipping classes, avoiding social interactions. "Maybe if I hadn't testified," she said during one of our phone calls, "maybe he'd still be alive." "Emma, listen to me," I said firmly. "Tyler chose to abuse you. Tyler chose to abuse other girls. Tyler chose to blame everyone else for the consequences of his actions. And Tyler chose to kill himself rather than take responsibility for his behavior." But Tyler's final manipulation was working. Emma was spiraling into depression, convinced she was responsible for his death. The media attention intensified when Tyler's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Emma, the school district, and me. They claimed we'd conspired to destroy Tyler's reputation with false allegations, driving him to suicide. Tyler's mother gave interviews painting him as a dedicated athlete whose life was destroyed by malicious lies. She conveniently forgot about the evidence of his abusive behavior, focusing only on his academic achievements and athletic potential. "My son was a good boy who made some teenage mistakes," she told reporters. "He was punished far beyond what he deserved, and it cost him his life. The lawsuit forced us to relive everything." Tyler's victims had to testify again about their abuse. The evidence of his manipulation was presented once more in court, but Tyler's parents had hired an expensive legal team that specialized in victim-blaming tactics. They argued that teenage relationships naturally involve conflicts, and that Tyler had been unfairly demonized for normal adolescent behavior. Emma's mental health deteriorated under the stress of the lawsuit and public scrutiny. She transferred to a college closer to home so I could support her better. Dr. Chen resumed Emma's therapy sessions, focusing on helping her understand that Tyler's suicide was not her responsibility. "Abusers often use threats of self-harm to control their victims," Dr. Chen explained. "Tyler's final act was just another attempt to manipulate Emma and regain control over the narrative. But the guilt was overwhelming Emma. She'd started having nightmares where Tyler blamed her for his death. She was losing weight again, not from Tyler's control this time, but from stress and depression." The other victims of Tyler's abuse were experiencing similar guilt and public backlash. Madison had to transfer schools after classmates began bullying her for causing Tyler's death. Chloe attempted suicide herself, unable to cope with the blame she was receiving for speaking out against Tyler. "I realized Tyler's death had given him more power over his victims than he'd ever had while alive. His suicide note had weaponized public sympathy against the girls he'd abused." The legal battle dragged on for months. Tyler's parents presented a carefully curated image of their son, highlighting his volunteer work and academic achievements while minimizing evidence of his abusive behavior. Emma was forced to relive her trauma in depositions and court proceedings. Tyler's lawyers aggressively questioned her credibility, suggesting she'd exaggerated the abuse for attention. "Isn't it true that you willingly participated in Mr. Brennan's fitness program?" Tyler's lawyer asked during Emma's deposition. "He made me believe I had to earn his love," Emma replied quietly. "I thought if I didn't follow his rules, he'd leave me." The lawyer pressed harder. "But you could have said no at any time, correct? No one was forcing you to exercise." Emma broke down crying. Even in a legal setting, Tyler's manipulation was being reframed as her choice. Public opinion remained divided. Some people recognized Tyler's suicide note as a final act of manipulation. Others believed Emma and the other victims had driven an innocent boy to his death. Emma's college experience was ruined. She struggled to maintain friendships, worried that people were judging her for Tyler's death. Her grades suffered as she battled depression and anxiety. "I wish I'd never met him," she told me during one of her darkest moments. "I wish I'd never testified. Maybe he'd be alive and I could just forget any of this happened." "Emma, if you hadn't spoken up, Tyler would still be out there hurting other girls," I reminded her. "You saved people from what you went through." But Emma was too consumed with guilt to see the bigger picture. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tyler's roommate at his alternative school contacted me with information he'd been afraid to share earlier. Tyler had been planning his suicide for months, he revealed. He'd talked about how he could use his death to get revenge on the girls who testified against him. He said dying would make everyone feel sorry for him and hate them, the roommate explained. He wanted to destroy their lives the way he thought they'd destroyed his. The roommate had recordings of Tyler discussing his plan. Tyler's suicide hadn't been a desperate act of shame and remorse. It had been a calculated final manipulation designed to transfer blame to his victims. This evidence changed everything. Tyler's parents' lawsuit crumbled as their portrayal of a remorseful boy driven to despair was exposed as another lie. Tyler had never felt genuine remorse for his abuse. He'd simply been angry that he'd faced consequences for his actions. The media narrative shifted again as Tyler's manipulative final plan was revealed. Public sympathy for his victims returned as people understood they'd been manipulated once more by Tyler, even after his death. Emma began to heal once she understood that Tyler's suicide had been just another form of abuse. He'd tried to destroy her life one final time, using his death as a weapon against her. "He never stopped being an abuser," Dr. Chen explained. "He just found a new way to hurt his victims." Emma returned to school with renewed purpose. She changed her major to social work, determined to help other abuse victims recognize manipulation tactics. She started speaking at high schools about Tyler's case, explaining how his suicide note had been a final act of psychological warfare against his victims. "Abusers will use any tool available to them," she'd tell students. "Even their own death can become a weapon if we let them manipulate us with guilt." Emma's advocacy work helped other victims of similar manipulation. She received messages from survivors whose abusers had used suicide threats to control them. The wrongful death lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Tyler's parents were ordered to pay our legal fees as punishment for filing a frivolous lawsuit based on fabricated evidence. Tyler's mother never apologized for the pain she'd caused Emma and the other victims. She maintained that her son had been unfairly persecuted until the very end. But Tyler's father reached out privately to express his regret. He'd finally accepted the truth about his son's behavior and was seeking therapy to process his own role in enabling Tyler's abuse. Emma graduated college with honors and began working with teenage abuse victims. She specialized in cases involving recognizing psychological manipulation and control. The nonprofit organization she joined had seen an increase in cases similar to Tyler's, young people using sophisticated manipulation tactics disguised as care and concern. Emma's experience made her uniquely qualified to help other victims recognize these patterns and break free from psychological control. Tyler's case became a teaching example in law enforcement training about intimate partner violence among teenagers. His sophisticated manipulation tactics were studied as an example of how abusers adapt their methods to avoid detection. The recordings I'd made of Tyler's behavior became part of a training program for parents, teachers, and counselors on recognizing psychological abuse in teenage relationships. Emma's story was featured in a documentary about teenage relationship abuse. She wanted other victims to understand that speaking out was worth it, even when abusers tried to use guilt and manipulation to silence them. Tyler's death doesn't erase what he did to me and other girls, Emma said in the documentary. It doesn't make him a victim or make us responsible for his choices. 5 years after Tyler's death, Emma married David, the supportive boyfriend she'd met in college. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine care, everything Tyler had pretended to offer. At their wedding, Emma gave a speech thanking everyone who'd supported her through the darkest period of her life. "I learned that real love doesn't require you to change who you are," she said. "It celebrates who you are and supports who you're becoming." Emma and David work together now, running programs for teenage abuse survivors. They've helped hundreds of young people recognize manipulation and build healthy relationships. Tyler's legacy isn't the sympathy he tried to manipulate through his death. It's the awareness his victims created by refusing to be silenced by his final act of abuse. Emma keeps a photo on her desk from her college graduation. She's smiling genuinely, surrounded by people who love and support her. It reminds her daily that she survived Tyler's manipulation and built a life worth living. The little girl who almost died from 1,000 burpees had grown into a woman who protects other children from similar predators. Tyler thought his death would destroy Emma's life. Instead, it motivated her to save others from the manipulation tactics he'd perfected. Some abusers never stop trying to control their victims, even from beyond the grave. But truth always wins eventually, and love that tries to control was never love at all. Emma learned that the hardest way possible, but she learned it. And now she's teaching others that survival isn't just about escaping abuse. It's about refusing to let abusers win, even when they try to use their own death as a final weapon. The recording I made of Tyler saying "weakness deserves pain" is still used in training programs today. It reminds people that sometimes the most dangerous words are spoken when the abuser thinks no one is listening. But someone was listening, someone was recording, and someone was brave enough to make sure the truth was heard, no matter how hard the abuser tried to silence it. That's the real ending to this story. Not Tyler's manipulative final act, but Emma's choice to keep fighting for truth, even when it would have been easier to stay silent.